Oh, hey there. I'm just in my kitchen and I'm all dressed up for my workout later. I thought I would make something for dinner. Now, you might be thinking, dinner, you're gonna make dinner and it is 10:20. So, what's that about? Well, it's this thing called the Crock-pot and I use it all the time. I have a lifestyle where I start working usually at 4 o'clock and until 8 or 9 at night because I teach music lessons. So I have to have something that's ready. If I don't have something ready, I'm going to eat junk food. If I eat junk food, I'm going to get sick. If I get sick enough, I'm going to die. And as much as I can't say I want to live forever, which I don't want to die prematurely either. So I am using the Crock-pot regularly. Now, the thing about the Crock-pot is it can be frustrating to find good recipes. A lot of them just kind of turn into mush, especially if you're talking about using vegetarian recipes. I eat a lot of vegetarian food based on a recommendation from my naturopath who said, well, heart disease runs in your family. High cholesterol is a big problem, and I have high cholesterol, or I had high cholesterol until she suggested that I start eating more vegetarian food, which was a no-brainer because my husband is a vegetarian. So I started buying books. This is from Eat Like You Give a Bleep. I like this one called Pumpkin Chili. For years, I didn't want to use cookbooks because I found them frustrating. I have trouble with the substitutions because my husband's vegetarian. He also has a gluten intolerance. And with the inflammation that I've had in my body over the last several years, I've had to cut out a lot of the key ingredients in most of the recipes that you'll find, especially vegetarian. There's a lot of tomato. And so I felt like, what's the point in using a recipe? You just have to substitute all this stuff out anyway. But I found good substitutions, and the pumpkin chili works out really well without tomato. You can just rely on some vegetable broth. So for the vegetable broth over here on the stove, I have my vegetable broth that's homemade. I just defrosted it. I use this little baggie to collect all of my clippings as I am preparing any recipe. So the stuff that looks good, I use again. I just cook the crap out of it, and then we drain the broth, and we put everything away into the freezer, and then we use it as we see fit for whichever recipes we want to use. So it looks like that. When it's in the little yogurt container, it's about 4 cups. And then when you're putting it into the pot to defrost, it looks like that. It comes out in a big lump. But at a low temperature, you don't even have to babysit it. It'll just defrost. All this stuff is about not babysitting. So as I was chopping up all the vegetables, I started my crock pot warming up. You can see it's on low. So it's been about a half an hour since I started this whole process. Now it's preheated. It's kind of like preheating your oven. You have to be careful because if you put stuff in that's hot and the crock pot is cold, you could crack the crock pot. So if you pre-warm it, then you can pre-cook everything, throw it all into the crock pot, and forget about it. It cooks much faster. I call that a crock pot cheat. And that's why I'm making this video, because I've had a few people say, well, crock pot, they take too long. I don't trust them. They might blow up. I don't want to leave them alone. You don't have to worry about any of that. The worst that will happen is it'll shut off and it won't cook. But if you start the process of cooking first, then you're good. So you're going to start off with your vegetables. We have here onion, jalapeno, garlic, and carrot. So this is a good example of things that would throw me off. I don't have any celery. I use substitutions, and I substitute the celery for the bell pepper, which I also don't have any of. So I would say, well, I won't do it then because I don't have all the ingredients. so it's not going to work out. But who cares if you don't have all the ingredients? Use what you have, substitute what you have, you'll get something good. So I always find my oven gets too hot too fast. I don't like to preheat the frying pan too much. Just a little bit of olive oil. I don't worry too much about measuring that stuff out. If you use too much, who cares? It's olive oil. It's not going to kill you. I am going to use tomato because the inflammation in my body has reduced significantly. So I have canned tomato and canned pumpkin. We'll use that along with our vegetable broth. And in my sink here, I have a medley of chickpea, lentil, and black bean. I'm using canned because I didn't plan this. Usually I plan the night before and I soak my beans. But I didn't do that this time, so I'm going to put the camera down. And hopefully you can still see me. So, it's pretty simple from here. I like to use a wooden spoon because I don't like to use plastic. I don't think that it's good for us. It doesn't feel right on my body or in my body. So I don't want to use it. So I try not to. But one of the other things I've learned is I don't drive myself nuts about any of it. If I can't find a wooden spoon, I use a plastic spoon. I don't cry myself to sleep. I don't worry about it too much. And the carrot. And I did a little preparation of our spices here. So we have chili powder, and that's not quite enough, but I ran out. Who cares? And then we have oregano here and cumin. I didn't use very much of that. It's an Indian spice. You might not want very much of that. And pepper and Himalayan sea salt. If you were using a store-bought vegetable broth, I wouldn't add any salt. There's too much salt in the vegetable broth. My dad has high blood pressure, and his was coming down, and then I started switching to these recipes since using store-bought, and his blood pressure went up again. And that was the only thing I could think. Well, we started using vegetable broth that was from bouillon or from an otherwise processed food, and it had a lot of sugar and salt, and it increased his blood pressure. So I started making homemade broth. If you look at something like the product, the Mrs. Dash is like a salt substitute. If you look at what's in it, it's all dehydrated vegetable. Well, what's in bouillon? It's dehydrated vegetable. So I thought, well, I'm just going to use Mrs. Dash and add some Himalayan sea salt and call that vegetable broth, and it works just fine. It works great. No problem. No problem, my friend. All right, so you can probably hear that simmering away. And you're just going to saute the vegetables. Maybe talk to your cat a little bit. I don't know, I was just thinking about like all this emphasis on healthy lifestyle, but no one actually shows you like what does that look like. For me, this is what it looks like. Planning ahead, being really willing to do the work like in the morning so that when I get my break at 6 o'clock, I can just eat dinner. I don't have to worry about what's for dinner or how long it's going to take or if it's going to be any good. It's already done. And for people who are working outside the home, you can do all this stuff, all the preparing of the spices and cooking or even just cutting up the vegetables in the morning. Toss it all in the crock pot, go to work, come back, and you have perfectly healthy, wonderful dinner. And if you want meat, add meat. It's fine. It works just as well. You can cook your meat separately. I do that a lot because I want to eat the meat. Martine doesn't want to eat the meat. We just get all that going in there. And it starts to smell fantastic. Say hi to your cat. who's come into the kitchen because he loves to be a part of the action. Hi, Miracle Kitty. What happens when you start to eat healthy? Do you feel better? He almost died in June, and then I started feeding him my food, and he's still alive. So you can see we get all those wonderful seasonings together. Often at this point I kind of look at it and go, well, I don't think there's enough oil in there. So I'd add a little more. And soy sauce. One of the things that I do is I often use more than what they suggest. I'm going to put the camera down over here. So this one calls for 2 teaspoons. I would probably just switch up to 1 tablespoon, partially because I'm upping the recipe. I'm using more beans, I'm using more vegetables, and I like it spicy. You have to be careful with the soy sauce too, because it's also got a lot of salt in it. So don't go nuts on that. Oh, it's too bad we don't have smell-o-vision. That smells good. So you just toss that around a bit. Have a look. Ooh, it's looking good. Here's a sample of the seasonings that I use, so you can have a peek there. The only one I'd say go easy on is the cumin. It's an Indian spice. I mean, you might like Indian spices, so then it's fine, but if you don't, or you're not really familiar, give yourself a try on that and see what you think, and if you like it, I use a lot, but... Okay, so that's, we're going to call cooked. So over here we have our canned tomato. Add that in. I also really don't worry about adding too much water, because it's going to cook in the crock pot, and the crock pot needs the water for it to cook properly. So, you know, you can have too much water, but then you can call it pumpkin soup. I have a jazz background, so I'm a very strong improviser. Now with the pumpkin, it's pretty thick. So one of the ways you can get around that is just adding it to the broth that you've defrosted. Or you could put it directly into the crock pot, but I'm trying to put only warm items into the crock pot so that it cooks faster. Because the recipe, when I started thinking to myself, okay, why do these crock pot recipes take so flippin' long? How can I figure out a way to get them to cook faster? The only thing I could think is cook the stuff before you put it in. Add it to a preheated crock pot that's already warmed. And then it should theoretically already be partially cooked and already warmed. It should cook faster, and it does. Not miraculously faster, it still takes a while. But it's nice when you have all the seasonings mixed together and they get the chance to combine over time. And the house smells amazing. Little spatula. A little water just to rinse it out. Don't forget all this stuff is recyclable. I get a little confused about it because, you know, no processed food. At first I was like, how am I going to do that? Like everything modern food-wide, it's all processed, right? The meat is grown and then they process that meat. Your vegetables are grown and they process those vegetables before they're even in the store. They've been cleaned, handled, packaged, washed, transported. That's all processed. That's all going through a process. Canning is a process. I try and soak my own beans, like I said before, but that takes time and foresight, really. I mean, I think that's a big part of healthy lifestyle, is planning ahead. How am I going to do that? What do I need? You know, if people were as dedicated to eating well as they are to smoking, there'd be no problem, because smokers always know where they always know where their smokes are and where they're going to get their smokes and how much they need to buy the next pack and yada yada yada, and they do all of that in their minds. Okay, so now we have this nice and cooked. We have this nice and pureed, so it's still thick, but it's not that thick. So I would usually start with the beans, but this part doesn't matter because now everything's already just about combining it. Beans, we have lentils, black beans, and chickpeas, but it doesn't matter. It would have been nice to have red beans, but we don't have any today. But I'm not going to cry. I'm just going to make it anyway. I'm not going to say, forget it, I don't have the right stuff. I'm just going to use the stuff I have on hand. I've also done a lot of research on what success is. Did a lot of reading on successful people, like biographies. Tried to figure out what they had in common. And they don't make a lot of excuses, you know? Like, they want to do something, like climb a mountain or make a movie or get into the New York Ballet or buy an island and never come off of it again. They just figure out a way to do it. So at this point, once I add all the ingredients, I'm going to be above the 4 level. This crock pot is nice because it's like 2, 4, 6. So I'm going to say we've got 6 cups so that the top of the crock pot will get warmed up too. You know, and you can go nuts on this part and try and scrape it all out and get every drop of everything if you want. And this is quite like a soup consistency right now, but it's 10:30, so it's gonna cook for a long time. I'm not gonna eat it till 6 o'clock. And also when you're freezing stuff, because we'll cook way too much, this is way too much for 2 people. If it has extra water in it, that's all to the good. And when you reheat it later, you end up with a nice thick consistency. And then if you want to make it soupy, you just add more water. Or another thing of broth. So, that's delicious.